You're tuned in to the Dr. Kinney Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Erin Kinney, a naturopathic doctor and speaker dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of your body and guiding you back into balance. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Kinney Show. This week I'm really pleased to have joining me Marie Burgess, who is a grief counselor and close friend, and I'm really excited for her to come on the show and share her story. She has a really powerful story and she does really amazing work. So Marie, thank you so much for being here and for agreeing to come on the show and get out of your comfort zone a little bit and chat about your work. And so thanks for being here.
I'm excited.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And, you know, a lot of people would be confused as to why I could be excited to talk about grief. But I recently said on a social media post I made, I had the urge to say grief is giving life. Because I come to life when I am working in the capacity of grief.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you all about that.
Yeah. Well, you have such a powerful story, and I'm hoping you will share your story for the listeners so they can kind of hear how you got to be in this place.
Well, that's a really interesting question, right? Because we've talked about together, you know, everybody gets into a line of work for a reason. And so when I'm asked, you know, how did you become a grief therapist? You know, a lot of times people don't want to know that story because grief turns people off. It shuts them down. They don't want to have anything to do with it. It's uncomfortable. And so they don't even want to ask the question. But it's a story I like to tell, even though it is a story that might be hard for some listeners to hear, because we are talking about the death of a child. And that is every parent's worst nightmare. Yeah. And it's my reality. And that's how I came into this line of work. You know, nothing is by accident, really. Nothing is by accident. And so my journey starts as a mid-20s mom looking forward to the birth of her first child. And we learned pretty quickly on in this journey that my child, my son who was not born yet, was going to come out fighting. He was going to have some challenges that we thought we could handle. You know, we're talking cleft lip and palate. We're talking maybe some hearing loss. And, you know, to us, that's like, okay, it's not what you want to hear as a new parent and a young family. And it felt doable, right? We were like, okay, we can do this. And we did it. But our journey didn't stop there. In fact, we continued one battle to the next, and we had to have a team. We had to rely on the people around us, and I understand that is not something everybody has. And so I like to do that now for people. And you might be like, well, what do you do, Marie? Like, you're a grief therapist. Like, do you just let people cry on your shoulder? I do that. I do let people cry. There is a lot of crying, okay? It's not just me, because I do join my clients if they are shedding tears. Like, it's natural human response. It's also true that I help parents who are like me find the meaning in their life again. Because after your child dies, lots of parents I ask myself the question, like, well, who am I if I am not this child's mother? Because this child is no longer here. And that is, I mean, where do you find the answer to that question?
I don't know.
Yeah, who can you ask?
I mean, I guess you ask God, but how do you know the answer?
Well, and that's actually a really poignant statement, because lots of people get upset with their higher power because the death of a child is out of the natural sequence, right? We don't expect children to die before their parents, and we especially do not expect young children to die. It goes against nature. And because that's part of my story, it can be hard for people to hear, but it doesn't. Talking about my deceased loved one doesn't weigh me down in the way that a lot of people would think it would, because it would be hard for them to talk about. And this is actually something I've learned through my grief journey, and like what the needs of the grieving are. And that's part of what I do, is to help people, not just the people who are the parents that are experiencing the loss, but those around them as well. Because I have a support network, but if somebody doesn't, or their support network is limited in their experience with grief, they don't know what to do. So I like to help those people as well. And so, well, how do I do that? Right? Like, it is not just by sitting there going, oh, yes, tell me more, as a regular therapist would do. Oh, please tell me about that.
Lay back on the couch and tell me a little more. How does it make you feel?
Lay back. No, we don't do that. I don't just let people spill and then do nothing. I am an active part of that journey with them. And it's an honor that I feel deeply within my soul when somebody invites me onto this journey with them, because it's a painful one, but it's also, and when we think about the human experience, there are only a few things that all humans go through. And one of them is grief. Yeah. It's a universal human experience that is not universally supported. Yeah. And so it's like my personal mission to find the parents like me, parents who are in this club that they didn't want to be in, and help them figure out what is their path now.
Yeah. Which is, it's such amazing work. I mean, I can't speak from any experiences, and thankfully that's not something I've experienced, but I've worked with patients in various other grief states, and one of the things I hear from patients a lot, they're like, oh, I was working with this counselor, but they're like, that person has not experienced what I've experienced, and it's really hard to feel safe to be vulnerable. Recently a patient of mine had lost her husband, had just passed away, and she was working with this young 20-something who wasn't even married, and she's like, she's lovely and she's a great therapist, but I feel like we didn't share, there was no empathy there. And she was like, I wanted the empathy. Like, I really need that. So she's, searching for someone else. But I think that's something that you really bring to the table, is you're able to really empathize. And I think it allows people probably to be more vulnerable and feel more safe, which will help their healing journey.
It does. And actually, you're hitting on another good point about the importance of the therapeutic relationship. Yeah. So there's lots of factors that go into whether or not the therapist that you work with is the best fit for you, the one that's going to help you or achieve your goals or make progress or feel safe. Yeah. There's so many factors. Maybe it's their education or their particular certification in like a special training or something. But push all that aside, and the number one indicator of client success is the relationship they have with the therapist. So it's important to me that I have a strong therapeutic connection. And, lots of therapists will be like, well, duh, like me too. Obviously, you want to have a strong therapeutic connection. But there is something different, a different level, a deeper level of connection that can happen when the therapist has also been through the thing that you have been through. And when it's the death of a child, that's not an everyday thing that happens. Yeah. And so finding someone who can truly understand what you're going through is hard. Yeah. Now, there might be other, providers and practitioners that listen to this and they're like, well, but you can still provide,
support, and absolutely,
a good support.
Right?
And that's true. And that is so true. And some might even say, well, what if your own stuff comes up in your work? That's like a big no-no in the therapy world, right? It's transference, countertransference. Yeah. But this is why, my son did not die last year. Yeah. He died 9 years ago. Yeah. And I knew that after he died, so one thing I haven't said about our story is that he was a hospice patient. Now you know this, Erin, because you know my story. Yeah. He was, and in case anybody doesn't know this, there is such a thing as pediatric hospice. And who would have thought, that this big scary thing, hospice, is something that children could also benefit from. Yes, I said benefit, because one of the things looking back that if I knew what I know now, right? We're talking about hindsight 2020. I would have asked for hospice services earlier, because the team at Hospice of the Chesapeake, a little plug there for them. I also volunteer for them. So
They're fantastic. Yeah.
Right. They're a wonderful anchor in this community. Yeah. They provided wraparound support that I didn't even know that I needed, and through that experience, I was like, I think I could do this. I think that I could one day, when I'm ready, help families like mine. I mean, I knew I wouldn't be able to do it right away. Yeah. One, because grief, right? Yeah. When it's raw, it's powerful. But after several years, it was about 4 years or so, I decided that I was going to go back and take the extra classes I had to take to get my clinical license so that I could help people like me. And I do, and that's what I do. And it's not by accident. Yeah. It's not. One thing I always say is that looking back, there was in no way was it by happenstance that some of my personal interests, like in high school, were like the differences culturally on death and dying.
Really?
Yes.
That's really interesting.
Yes. In undergrad and grad school, every project or paper that I could pick the topic on was on death, dying, or grief.
Huh. Did you have a major grief episode when you were younger?
I had several losses throughout my childhood. As early as I can remember was one of my classmates.
Oh, wow.
Died from sickle cell, complications of sickle cell anemia.
Wow.
And Debrina Posey still sat next to me in my class, and my classmate died. And that was my first experience with grief. And nobody knew
what to do or how to
in
support
the 90s,
you.
back in the old days, the 1900s, as my kids would say.
So long ago.
I know, my gosh, I'm ancient. They didn't know what to do with kids, especially children grievers, and the loss is compounded as I grew, up until the point where it was my own child. And so none of that was by accident. I was prepared to be Harvey's mom because, I stopped talking at the cleft lip and palate, but I mean, the complications continued. He died from complications of a rare form of epilepsy, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, where he would have hundreds of seizures a day.
Oh, wow.
Some of them you could see happening and some of them you could not.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, that takes a toll on your body.
Yeah.
And he was on oxygen. He had a GJ tube, and we were high flyers at Hopkins, first name basis with all of the specialists. And that was part of our story, and as strange as it may sound, and this is because if you haven't been there, you don't know. But after Harvey died, we weren't just grieving his, the end of his life. Yeah. We had to grieve the loss of an entire community.
Yeah.
We had to grieve the loss of a lifestyle. I consider myself a medical mama.
Yeah.
And everything changed. Everything.
It was like multiple layers of grief.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm talking about the intricacy, the nuance of being able to connect with parents who are on this very specific grief journey. Is that when they say something to me like, my house sounds different, I am immediately...
You're like, I get it.
Yes.
There. Yeah.
Yes. Because at my house, we went from having oxygen machine on all the time, oxygen concentrator, that sounded like a little generator that ran all the time.
And then it was gone.
We went from being a rolling circus with like a medical transport chair and a wheelchair and all these devices to what life is like for everybody else. And that was a huge shift when everything changed. Not just, we were on the outside, we looked like a family of 4, and now we look like a family of 3. Everything changed. Everything about our lives.
Yeah. It's a lot.
It is.
What kind of support did you have during that time? I mean, did you have a you?
That's no one's ever asked me that.
I'm just thinking. I'm like, you probably wanted a you, right? If you could go back, would you have wanted someone like you?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
why you're doing this, right?
Yes. Because I needed a me.
Yeah. But
there wasn't one.
Yeah. Did you have any support? Like, what did your grieving look like? How did you support yourself?
Team Harvey was our team. So Team Harvey consisted of anyone and everyone who wanted to share the burden of our grief.
Yeah.
And we have T-shirts
awesome.
and all different kinds of colors. Yes. We did fundraisers, you know. But my team, my immediate team was my parents, my sister, and my husband's parents. And, I'm talking like when we were inpatient at the PICU at Hopkins in Baltimore, because that's where we always went. Taking a helicopter ride there even. We would take shifts because
no one could do that all the time. Yeah.
No. Well, and we wanted someone with Harvey 24/7 because he was nonverbal. So, and he was 4.
Yeah.
So even if he could verbalize what his needs were, he was a child.
Yeah.
So we did not want to leave him. And so our team, and this is a luxury and privilege that I fully recognize, because we would be in the PICU and then there would be children that had nobody with them. Mm-hmm. And that was heartbreaking. Yeah. But we knew that we could provide someone there with Harvey, and so we did. So what that looked like was, before we had another child, my husband or I would be there with him. We would take leave from work because we were still working.
Yeah.
I was working in a high school at the time as a school counselor. My husband was working for Apple. And we would take shifts. I would stay with him for 2 weeks in the hospital, and then my husband would stay with him for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And when I was working and he was there, my mom or my dad or my mother-in-law or my father-in-law would come to my house and buoy and pick me up and drive me to Hopkins. And this is after they all worked their full days of work.
Yeah.
So we were running, we were going.
So you had a good team.
Solid.
Yeah.
Solid.
Yeah.
And I still do.
Yeah.
Team Harvey still gathers.
I love that.
We just participated in the fun run for hospice, their first fun run, to raise money for Chesapeake Life programming, which is the programming where pediatric hospice and children grievers are supported. And we wore our Team Harvey shirts.
Oh, I love that. So
and we gather, actually, since you probably don't know this. I don't know if I've told you this or not, but after Harvey died, one of the ways that my parents chose to honor him was to have dinner with us every week.
Oh, that's really nice.
And so today, Wednesdays, are family dinners.
Oh, I like
so my parents are going to be at my house.
Oh, nice.
We're recording on a Wednesday,
oh,
so they'll be at my house later
Yeah.
tonight, and we're going to have dinner.
That's fantastic.
And
So
they're
like keeping, that's kind of, I feel like, a good testament to what you say. You help people find life again. You guys are
Yes.
keeping up, and his memory's so alive, and you're.
Yes.
But I think it's so easy in any sort of grief. You get caught. You're like, what's the point? Why would I? I mean, maybe you can speak to that a little bit more.
Well, yeah, that's a good question, because at least in our society, we're encouraged to kind of, you get 3 days?
Yeah.
5 days?
Of bereavement, not very long.
Bereavement leave. And what is that when your life is turned upside down?
Yeah.
And it's nothing. It's
nothing.
not enough.
No.
And
You're kind of still in shock at that point anyway.
Literally still in shock. You're lucky if you are even cognizant of how many days have passed.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear from a lot of parents that they aren't functioning after. And I really appreciate my 10-month-old at the time, who I was breastfeeding. And, you know, so I literally had to provide for him. And so that kept me from kind of getting stuck, I think. But not everybody has that. And sometimes that's who I like to work with a lot, actually, is people find themselves stuck in grief because we are encouraged as a culture to move on, right? Move forward.
Yeah.
Everyone says we're moving forward. We're not moving on. Okay. And then what?
Yeah.
Because where does all that love go that you had?
Yeah.
That you have?
Yeah, that you have, because it's never going away.
Right. It's not going to go away. So people don't know what to do in the face of grief because they think that since my love is going to last forever, my grief is going to last forever, and my pain is going to last forever. And part of that is true in the sense of, like, we're not going to be able to bring them back. Right. Yeah. And there is no going back to who you were before it happened. That's impossible because you're not the same. Yeah. You're not the same as you were yesterday as you are today. And I'm definitely not the same girl that I was when Harvey died. Yeah. I'm not. And, like, I know her. Yeah. She knows me, but
you're not the same.
We're not the same. Yeah. I help people figure out what to do with the love that they have when they think that the grief will never dissipate. Okay, so they think if my love lasts forever, my grief lasts forever. But grief does not involve suffering. And that's kind of where we get mixed up. Like, there's going to be some pain, but the suffering is not necessary and it's optional. So if you find yourself suffering, then that is from this loss, and you're just in so much pain that you are stuck. That's an indicator that it's time to look at integrating the loss into your life instead of holding it at arm's length.
That you almost, like, haven't opened yourself up to allow it to really, you haven't felt it really.
You haven't felt it in the way that it needs to be felt. And the reason that is, at least in my experience, is because we do a really shabby job of witnessing other people's grief.
Yeah.
Because of all of the reasons. Like, what are some of the reasons why, if someone says, like, when we first met?
I mean, I think I've been in a situation, like, you're worried you're going to say the wrong thing, you're going to offend them, you're like, oh my God, I don't want to make them cry, I don't want to, so you just kind of are like, I don't know what to do. And I think it's a really common thing that people, you know?
Yes.
Especially, I think, if you haven't really fully experienced the depths of grief yourself, because you're like, well, I don't know what it would feel like, right?
Right. And so not saying something comes usually from a place of great intention.
Yes.
Right? I don't want to mention their loved one because they look like they're okay today, and I don't want to make them cry or something. But as you know, working with people who are trying to heal themselves, when has avoidance been the answer?
Oh, no. And we've done episodes on this before where, you know, if you keep an emotion trapped in, emotions are meant to be felt. They're energy in motion. And if you keep, you know, you did this, like, keeping grief at bay, like, if you keep, it's going to turn up as a physical symptom in the body.
1,000%.
Right?
Absolutely.
So if you don't, if it's like, I always tell patients, I'm like, if I were to take an apple and, like, was like, you know, take a bite out of it and stick it in a drawer and leave it there for months and months and months, eventually that apple is going to rot and my whole room is going to smell.
Right.
And it's not going to be fun to open up the drawer to clean it out because it's going to be a mess. But until I clean that out, my room is going to smell, right? Like,
right.
So, you know, when we don't deal with things, we don't feel them or let ourselves, you know, let the emotion move through us, it can turn into physical ailments and or anxiety, depression, you know, kind of chronic long-term things, which I think a lot of people who've dealt with a major grief can suffer from that if they haven't properly integrated it into their life, right?
Yes. And in fact, many of the clients that I work with meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
And I too met the criteria for that from what I witnessed as a medical mom, living in the PICU, but also witnessing my child die, at my home is
a lot of trauma.
And so I have actually made it a personal mission of mine to make sure that if there are benefits that people can take advantage of, that I help them do that.
Yeah, good.
And a lot of times they're like, but my staff is already shorthanded, or
for not taking time off to grieve.
And I'm like, that sounds like a them problem. We are not going to solve systemic problems in our society by you taking your bereavement leave.
Yeah.
That's not a thing.
Yeah.
What is a thing, though, is that you won't get this time back.
Yeah.
And we know, and everybody, at least as adults, right, especially with the parents that I work with, they have a reference for grief.
Yeah.
They have a reference.
Meaning they've experienced it at some point, right?
Right. Or they've known someone who's gotten stuck in grief, or they've known someone who kind of put it off and put it away. And they can see for themselves the negative outcomes of that, and they don't want that for themselves, but they also need someone like me to say, no, you absolutely need to do this for your own healing. I will help you.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it doesn't, not sometimes, it never feels good, right? To get in touch with grief and to really feel it. It doesn't feel good. Or I don't know, is there a way you can make it feel good?
Maybe
it does. It can feel like a release, but I think we're always so scared of how it's going to feel, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I don't want to feel that. That feels painful. That's going to be sad. It's yucky. It's rotting fruit. It's gross, right?
Right. Like, who wants to deal with that?
Yeah. It's almost easy to be like, well, I'm just going to move forward and move on and keep going and keep going.
I'm just going to bury it. Throw it out, but that's...
Yeah, well, it's not going to be beneficial down the line.
Because what happens, this is what happens, okay, is people find themselves avoiding the big emotion, which totally understandable, right? Because it sucks, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, makes you ugly cry, snot and everything, and right,
sobbing.
You're hyperventilating, and then, this is in response to some rando at Target that's like, oh, do you have other kids?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my favorite thing. That's another conversation. Oh, you look of childbearing age. Tell me about your family. Mm-hmm. Boom. Now you're crying. You're snot crying.
Yeah.
And
they're like, what did I do?
Right.
Yeah.
And that happens when
you haven't probably dealt with it. You don't have the space. You don't have the support.
Right.
You don't have the weekly meeting with Marie. Who's
right.
gonna help you channel this and move it in a good way.
Right. You might do that with support if
in
you
the beginning
are the beginning, in the very beginning phases.
Yeah.
But if you're still doing that, if you're still having intense emotional overwhelm with like intense physical symptoms, and you're like
5-6 years out,
even like 2 years out, even a year out.
Yeah.
And this is not to say that the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, blah, 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 of all of the diagnoses that we use in therapy is correct per se. Yeah. But a lot of people have agreed that if it's been more than a year
then
since...
it's clinical depression? Or
it's prolonged grief disorder.
I actually didn't know that was a disorder. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yes, thank you, DSM-5.
Oh, wow.
Prolonged grief disorder is a criteria that many of my clients meet. Because they have these symptoms that have not resolved over what we would consider in our society as a like standard grief period.
Got it.
So if it's been more than a year and you're still having all of these intense responses, or you're not enjoying yourself, or you're having a hard time, not to say that you need to bounce back and be like, life is great and sunshine. No, what I'm saying is if you are questioning what your purpose is or who you are now after the death of your loved one, I'm speaking specifically about a child, but this could be about anyone, your best friend or your partner or your parent. Like, if you don't know who you are anymore after that person has left this plane, that's an indicator to talk to somebody who knows a little bit about this journey.
Yeah. It's funny. I have several women that, whose husbands have passed within the last year that I've been treating, and a couple of them that comes up often. They're like, I just, they've been married for 40 years, and like, I don't know who I am without this person in my life. I don't know, like the beds, all the little things.
My husband and I fuss at each other about who's allowed to die next because we're like, no, you can't. We fight, and we're like, it's playful fighting. Yeah. I'm like, no, I think I get to die next.
Because you're like, I can't deal with losing
because if you go, I'm done. I'm moving to a little island. I'm going to live in a little shack in the mountains.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be bothered after that.
Oh man.
No, too much, no more, nothing, like, no. And we giggle. Yeah. But that's because we've done the work.
Yeah.
To get to that place.
Yeah.
And it does make people uncomfortable. Like, I'm not going to lie.
Talking about grief or just all the things?
Yeah, all of it. They're like, how can you laugh talking about death? I literally said on like a social media post the other day after my grief group, because I do run a group for parents like me.
Yeah.
I said, how is grief giving life?
Oh, I like
because even though I just facilitated like 2 hours of parents talking about their worst nightmare, afterward, I was charged up and just so proud of them and excited for their journey because they need each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Need
Well, I think
people.
also when you think about like a good cry or a good release of any emotion, it's like a detox almost. And like you do feel lighter. You have more energy. Like it's like a purge of things. Yeah. It's funny you keep saying, you mentioned that a couple of times, like how is grief giving life? This is what keeps coming up for me. I had to write this essay on I think it was a Walt Whitman line. It was death is the mother of beauty. Mm-hmm. And I think about that line a lot because I had to write it.
Walt Whitman quotes are all over if you type grief and quotes.
But if you think about that, like without death or without grief, like you wouldn't appreciate life as much. Like, I think that's probably the gist of it is, like when you're able to come through the grief of losing a child and you're like, wow, like everything else becomes so much more precious.
Right.
And
yes,
right,
and yes, and
that's what we want to get to that place.
Yes, and people might hear this and say, "Well, how could you ever get there?"
Yeah,
and that comes from a place of not knowing or not understanding.
Yeah,
because so you've heard of the 5 stages of grief, right? Yes. Like, what do you remember? Like bargaining,
denial, anger, bargaining, what is it?
Depression, and acceptance.
Yeah.
Right. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk a little bit about grief theory.
Okay,
I'm going to nerd out on this.
Great.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, well known around the world for her 5 stages of grief.
Yeah.
Okay. When she wrote those stages, she included a whole bit about how they're not linear and how you can go back and forth. And
it's not like you have to do them in order, right?
Right. But that's not very tweetable.
Yeah.
Right?
Like you want to have the list of like first is denial, then is anger.
Right. We love a list.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Especially in our society.
And or a book. It's not great to write a book about something that's back and
give
forth.
me a bullet point.
Yes.
And I want to be able to check it off and then it's done. Right.
Yes.
That's not how grief works.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth knew that. But our media or however, the people who spread the word about these things, we got really stuck on you do this and then you do this and then you do this and then you're done.
Good job. Here's your certificate.
Star.
You passed your grief test.
Right. Yeah. You did it, and that's just not reality. Yeah. And so there's an updated model of that. So Elizabeth had a mentee, David Kessler.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's a world-renowned grief expert. And I do have to say, I was fangirling so hard because I took his grief educator certification program where he was teaching us every week for 6 months. And I was just like,
really cool.
Wow. Who knew in the 6 degrees of separation game that I would be 1 degree of separation from Mother Teresa. Okay. Because that's, and Priscilla Presley. Okay. I digress. This is my ADHD coming out. Like, wow, everything's screaming to come out. So David and Elizabeth wrote numerous books together on grief theory. So David and Elizabeth they wrote several books together, and with her blessing, he expanded on this model of the 5 stages of grief into the 6 needs of the grieving. In the 6 needs of the grieving, it's not linear. It's a need that should be met in order for you to completely find meaning and integrate the loss into your life. So, for example, one of the needs that we were talking about earlier is the need to be witnessed. So this is where we talk about, what does somebody do? What do they say? They're uncomfortable by grief, but they want to support you. What should they do? One of the most prominent needs, this is where I see where people get stuck initially, is that they need to talk about what happened. They need people to listen and not try to fix or solve or make it go away. They just need to be heard and witnessed. If you don't have your pain witnessed, then it has nowhere to go.
Well, it's going to keep coming up because it wants to be seen, right?
It wants to be seen. It deserves to be seen. But it is hard for people to see it because of what comes up for them.
Yeah.
And I know listeners can relate to this. Anytime that somebody has died, they're worried about saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the little sections of my grief group is, this is going to be funny for anybody that watches, what is the show? What is the cartoon with Stewie and Peter Griffin?
Oh, Family Guy. Oh,
Jeez,
I'm a big Family Guy friend. Yeah.
Okay. So, when he has the grinds my gears.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a little segment that I do in my Pushing Daisies group called What Grinds Your Gears in Grief. And that's where we get to talk about all the shit that people say that is just really
You're just like,
wrong.
Shouldn't have said that one.
No, and this is where you hear the horror stories,
Yeah.
the things that people meant with a good intention, but really
Screwed that up.
real bad.
Yeah.
And so to those listeners that, let me tell you what some of those things are. And what to say instead.
Yeah.
Because
I
I want to be helpful, right?
Yeah.
So what's one? God only gives you what you can handle.
No, not a good one.
No, that is
Not a good one.
No, because that makes people immediately pissed.
Yeah.
They're like, I
didn't want to handle this.
I'm
handling it, but I don't want to be.
Right. And then that starts people questioning their higher power. They don't want to question that. They don't want to question whether or not the plan, it always included this, right?
Yeah.
That's not a good feeling. Another one is, okay, this is giving me, I'm having a response here.
To this one?
My hands are starting to sweat. Okay.
That's got to be all right. So what's this one?
They're in a better place.
Oh.
No.
Yeah,
No.
That one doesn't
You know,
feel
when
very good.
when you say that my child is in a better place, what
Not
better
with their
place is
mother.
there to be with their mom?
Yeah.
Wrong
Yeah.
answer. Don't say that. It's a good intention,
Yeah.
right? Because people.
Well, I think
are
all these things are said with good intention. People are like, hey, I want to. What do I say to make them feel better? Or feel like, you're trying to connect, right?
Yes, and you're trying, and the effort is observed. But let me give you a thing or two to say that is not going to make someone's blood pressure spike when they hear it. Okay, so you hear of a loss, you don't know what to say.
Yeah.
That's what you say.
I don't know what to say.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah. And just leave it at that.
And just leave it. Period.
Yeah.
Don't.
Well, and what that says, I feel like when you do that is, especially if you've just listened to someone, that says like, hey, I heard you. I'm not going to input my own experience. We're just going to let that be, and I'm going to witness your pain.
I'm going to witness your pain.
Yeah.
Because when you witness someone's pain, you are sharing the burden with them.
Yeah. Could you just say, I'm so sorry?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's also just a really simple, I'm so sorry, hug,
I'm
listen.
so sorry that you went through that.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that they are not here with you
Yeah.
when you want them to be here with you.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that this isn't the life that you pictured when you were a 25-year-old new mom.
Yeah.
Like that, right?
Yeah. And that's reflecting back to, it's like reflecting back what they've shared with
it
you,
is.
which is it's good listening practice,
it is.
right?
It is, and so another common thing that people say when they're trying to support someone who is grieving, again, with good intentions, is, I'm here for you. Just let me know what you need.
Yeah.
And I got you.
But oftentimes people don't know what they need, right?
They don't know what they need. Not only do they not always know what they need. I'm sorry, Erin. Did you just always love asking for help?
No, I'm terrible at asking for help. I'm the worst at asking for help. I've had to be a lot of therapy to help me get, but yeah.
Right.
And especially when and I think a lot of women are like this. We're like, no, I'm going to do it myself. Like, so even if 15 people say, hey, let me help you out. I can drive your daughter. You're not going to ask for that.
No, because now not only is that something you have to follow up on.
Yeah.
Is now this has become.
You feel like you're now beholden to them.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
yes.
I don't want to make them upset that I didn't call them and ask them for help.
Oh my gosh. Or like, what if you sink and people are like, but we said we would help you. And now you're feeling guilty.
So what would you say instead of that? If you really did want to help someone, what would be the better?
So what I recommend, and this depends. Okay. There's a caveat here. Okay. This is not like a blanket for everyone to do for everyone in every situation is. Depending on your relationship with that person. If you have a close relationship with them.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm sending pizza over on Friday night for the family.
Just offer them the help.
Let me know, if it's a problem or you don't want me to, respond with no.
Yeah. So give them like specific, because I think this also makes a lot of sense for someone. If someone's acutely grieving, you're already so overwhelmed. Your brain is not making decisions. To have to make another decision is a lot of an
Even
ask.
the decision to accept help is too much.
Yeah.
And sending over a care package. Come on, Amazon makes this so easy.
Yeah. So it's like that's the way you help, is you send over
Me and
something.
Jeff Bezos, we have a lot that we could argue about, but it's not this. I love that he's made it so easy that I could put together a little care package
and
send it to my friend's house who's going through something.
Yeah.
Without even her knowledge or anything.
Just arrives.
Boom.
Yeah.
Like there it is. What
Yeah.
is it? Staples. It's tissues and stuff that you mince, a coloring book, self-care items.
Yeah.
And
Socks.
let's not forget that most people still have to live their life with this
while
grief
they're
process.
grieving. Yeah.
So, like with other siblings, for example, like if you are someone supporting a grieving family and they have children, send something for the children.
Yeah.
So that they can be occupied and mom can go take a shower.
Yeah.
Or dad can go and cry with mom or
Yeah.
can attend my group, for example.
Yeah.
Something that maybe doesn't support that adult person directly, but can support their family unit.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah.
I have a story about helping that I will share if you want to hear it.
Go for it.
So speaking of my team, my support network, Team Harvey, I will never forget my friend who came over and cleaned my bathroom.
Oh, wow. Without asking, just showed up and did it?
She showed up with a bucket of cleaning supplies.
Wow.
And was like, I'm here to clean your bathrooms. Don't talk to me. You don't have to entertain me. I am here to do what I knew I could do.
Yeah.
Because, again, in that situation, she's like, what do I do?
Yeah.
She's just another 20s, late 20s young person.
Never been through an experience like this ever.
No,
probably.
and she didn't have kids at the time.
Yeah.
She does now, but she didn't have kids at the time. But she knew she wanted to help me, and she knew enough from listening to me, like, because I was an advocate of saying, like, what I needed from people.
Yeah.
And, like, which my friends will say, like, I'm so thankful of everything I've learned through your journey, because now they are better supporters for other grievers. But she came to my house and cleaned my bathrooms
Wow.
and left.
That's really cool. This has been really great. I don't think this is where I thought the conversation would go, but I think it's really great. I think it's really great to give people who are not grieving themselves, but who are maybe have a friend or someone else who's grieving and they don't know what to do.
This is a universal experience.
Yeah.
We cannot escape this.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, everyone's going to have to go through grief at some point.
Right. So whether it's you or it's someone you love and care about, there's a good way to do it, a healthy way that's going to help your loved one integrate the loss into their life.
Yeah.
And then there's the other ways. And those show up on the grind my gears segment of group where it's not helpful, even though that's the intent.
Yeah. But oftentimes, do a lot of your people in your group, are they reflecting back to that person in the moment, hey, that wasn't helpful? Or are they probably just silently,
No, but I give them the tools to do that.
Yeah, because I think sometimes that can be helpful, right? If you're like, wow, I really don't know what to say, and then you say something, and then they just smile, you might do it again the next time.
Right. What I like to do is empower the parents that I work with to take charge of their own grief journey. They don't have to do it. There is nothing about grief that is like a blanket works for everyone. Grief is highly individualized.
Yeah.
And I really encourage my grieving clients, my grievers as I call them, to take charge of this journey.
Yeah.
Because this is their journey. They have to figure out how to navigate the rest of their life without their loved one.
Yeah.
And what better way to do it than to tell people with certainty what you need?
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe now we can switch gears and talk a little bit about what you offer. Like if someone is listening and they're either going through this themselves or they've got someone who they think really needs this kind of support, talk about the different, I mean, obviously we've talked about the grief group that you offer. I know people can work with you one-on-one.
Yes.
So maybe talk a little bit about different ways that you've incorporated helping people into your work.
Yes. I have really made I mean, maybe it's not made. I have found a way to integrate my grief into helping me help others to build up their lives.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is very fulfilling, but it's also very hard.
Yeah.
It's heavy work. So I keep a small caseload, but I try to reach other people in different ways. Okay, so how do I do that? So I do see clients one-on-one. I see a small number of clients. I do have an opening. I see grieving parents is where my heart lies, but also grieving kids because those kids had parents.
Yeah.
Those kids had siblings. And, you know, my son, who was 10 months old at the time, knows that his older brother died.
Yeah.
You know, and he shows his grief in different ways. I have a group. Pushing Daisies is the name of that group. And that is a little play on the phrase that, like, daisies will push out from the grave. Like, you plant them and they push up. And there was a show back in the 90s about death and okay, but back in the 1900s, as my kids would say again. So Pushing Daisies is a little play on that sort of phrase where it's like, hey, we're talking about grief and we're talking about dying and we're talking about death, but we're also having a little bit of fun with it.
Yeah.
Right.
We're coming up from the ground.
Yes, we're looking at how we can blossom. You know, speaking of a nature metaphor, that's another way that I help people. So as a certified nature-informed therapist, if you look at the natural world, there are grief metaphors aplenty. I like to use nature as a way to integrate post-traumatic growth. That's one of the focus points for a lot of my clients is growing through this traumatic grief experience. So we do that individually, one-on-one. We do that in our group where parents can hear from other parents that they're not alone. I also do intensives. So this is something new that I'm introducing for my clients, because the few that I have done intensives with have had remarkable
Results.
shifts. Yes, remarkable. And so what an intensive is a 3 to 4 hour block where we do several grief interventions. So my main intervention is brain spotting.
Oh, cool.
And then we'll do secondary intervention. So I tend to focus on past, present, and future with 3 interventions and then a secondary intervention for each. And we do that in nature.
That's really cool.
And it's individualized for the person.
And you also help other providers if they're struggling with I know we've talked about this before. If,
Yes.
If you're a provider and you're listening and you've got a patient or a client who's going through an intense grief process and you don't know how to walk them through it, Marie is a really great resource to come and she almost does consulting with you, like how to, do you go to the funeral? Do you, like, how do you walk through that? Because we don't get a lot of training on this.
Oh, no.
Right? Like nobody gets a lot of training around here. I mean, unless you're doing hospice or doing that work, but and it's going to come up, like depending on what population. It actually doesn't really matter what population you're in. It's going to come up. If you're a provider, you are going to have either a client pass or you're going to have someone in their life that's close to them pass. And, and I think having someone like you as a resource to figure out, like, what do I do? Do I send something? Do I do this? Do I offer help? How do you walk through that so that you're continuing to support them in the best way possible?
Yes, that is a service I offer, from hearing from other professionals that they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And, there's so many guidelines and ethics and laws and, all this kind of stuff and they vary by profession. So people just, if they ask their buddy, but their buddy has a different license than them, they're like, what do I do?
Yeah.
So, professionals will come to me and they tell me what's coming up for them or where are they getting stuck in supporting the client effectively. And then I help them with that. So whether it's their own stuff coming up, whether they've experienced a loss and they don't
know how to integrate that into their work.
Right. Or they don't know if it's appropriate or they don't.
Yeah.
Right. Or they don't know, should they go to the funeral? So I will actually, and I did this for a colleague of mine, friend colleague, who had a client's parent pass away and was kind of like, what, as a therapist, we have pretty
strict
guidelines and ethics on what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. So I helped walk her through, and as a provider, and she's supporting this family, I was helping her with, like, okay, here's what they might ask, here's what you can anticipate happening, here's and so that, because she was just like frazzled and didn't know what to do, so I was that steady place for her. And, I was able to, I talked with her several times, hour at a time or whatever she needed. And she went and she managed that situation beautifully.
Yeah, which that's such an amazing resource, which isn't out there a lot. So I'm glad you're doing that.
Yeah. And it's another way, as an educator at heart, being in a public school, my mom's a teacher and I worked in a public school for a decade. Being an educator at heart, I like to help other people by teaching them how to do this, how to navigate these tricky, messy situations without doing the wrong thing, and actually so that they come out even stronger with their client on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Because there's potential for things to
not go so well,
go terribly.
Yeah.
But the way that they navigated the situation with my help, things are even better with the family.
Yeah. They came up. They grew through the grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, they grew through the grief. That post-traumatic growth.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for giving all these different tips and sharing your story and just being here. So we will put links to where people can find you, and if there's any other resources you want to offer to people.
So one of the ways that I give back to my local community is I do a lot of work with the Hospice of the Chesapeake as a volunteer and as a facilitator. So, if someone's like, I want to work with Marie, but I don't need a individual therapist, or maybe my kid needs somebody, check out the local hospice, Hospice of the Chesapeake, or even your local hospice, wherever you're listening from, and see what services they have, because there's people like me who are experts in this field that are donating their time because it's something that they care about, that I care about. So free resources are offered through hospice. I facilitate some of their groups and activities and workshops. In fact, I am leading a group with them this fall and in the spring called Parenting While Grieving.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. And get this, and this is not by accident, we are also offering a free children's event that happens concurrently with these parents.
Oh, so the parents can come and have childcare. Oh,
Yes.
that's amazing. That's great.
So my friend and longtime hospice volunteer, John, makes breakfast for the kids. They have breakfast for dinner. Great. They do crafts. They talk about their loved ones. And the parents are upstairs getting grief support by me or any of the other hospice providers that are all totally talented. I offer free community resources for nature-informed therapy. So I do nature events around the state. I just had my last one for this year, so stay tuned for 2025.
Nice,
yes,
nice. Yeah.
One each season, right? Makes it easy.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been incredible. Thank you guys so much for listening. Go check out Marie. Oh, so we'll put your socials on there too, so you can go follow her on social, because she posts some great content. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to connect with me on social media to find more helpful tips and information. You can find me at Dr. Kinney on all of the platforms. And please be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and/or a review. This helps grow the show so more people have access to this knowledge that leads to empowered healing. Love and light, and see you next week.